Well guys, Honda is back. He was running fine for 2 days and then he experienced the problem again, long crank, and then check engine light and VSA came back on. So I was finally able to duplicate this problem. Now, it's kind of funny because when I pulled the codes this morning from the ABS module, we had a code 8313, which is ECM PCM communication error. So now in a ABS module I have no codes, even though I have a vehicle stability assist light on the dash. Now let's go to a engine. And I have a P0339 crankshaft sensor intermittent interruption. Let's go ahead and get the troubleshooter. P0339. Now our cable was a problem for sure, so basically sets the possible causes or faulty connection at the crankshaft sensor. That's not the case because I already checked that. Failure engine ground or body ground, I checked that as well. We fixed that. Damage crankshaft pulse plate, that's not the case because my crankshaft sensor signal was fine. Now the main engine ground, PCM ground, is actually coming from this point here on the engine block, and that's okay as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear this code. Okay, no codes. Alright, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and turn the headlights on. For 2 minutes. Actually, let's go ahead and start the engine. So the VSA light is still on. That's a little weird. But even though I still don't have a codes. Okay, now the lights are off. Alright. Okay, so let's just leave it like this and turn the headlights on for 2 minutes. Alright. Let's see what happens. My battery voltage is 12.4. 12.3 after a minute and a half almost. That's alright. 2 minutes. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to let the battery recover a little bit. We are back to 12.5 volts. So let's crank the engine over. Well, this time it was fine. Let's try again. Let's try it again. The battery is 11.9 at this point. What we got? There you go. That's my symptom. And there's a check engine light and VSA light came back on. Let's check the codes. And I got a P0339. I don't want to airbag. No. .8313 came back. So this is all during the long crank time. Interesting enough, the minimum voltage was 10.10 volts. So I got my lights on. Just engine is cranking slow. That's what the problem is, I believe. Okay, let's see what happens. I got my scope on my crankshaft position sensor. Okay, so this happens when the voltage drops down to 9 volts, and now we have we'll get back on. Now this is when the engine started it finally, and the cranking time was almost like 4 seconds. But as soon as we cranked the engine over, we had a crankshaft position sensor signal. This is cranking. I don't see any glitches in the signal itself. And voltage was at 5 volts. And the ground was a little elevated, 200 millivolts, but this is doing cranking, so that's okay. So, I mean, the bottom line is that, you know, the computer should not flag the code for the crankshaft position sensor. The signal is present, and this is when we started it. And there's nothing wrong with this signal at all. I just talked to a owner, and he told me that this problem, after I replaced the cable last time, the problem happened only once. One morning, that was Wednesday, when it's very cold, and he again did the same symptoms that I was able to duplicate. And it was a long crank time, VSA, a check engine light came on, and we could see that the same codes for communication code and the crankshaft position sensor code, and they came every single time when the voltage drops down to below 11.5 volts. And at this point, I'm confident to replace this battery. This is a Walmart brand. It's almost 4 years old. The battery still had enough juice to crank the engine over. It's a 4-cylinder engine. It doesn't take that much amps. However, the voltage drops significantly, and then computer doesn't like it and flag all these codes. I was able to confirm that I do have a crankshaft position sensor at the time when the symptoms are happening. During the long crank time, we could see the cranking was about 4 seconds. This whole time the sensor was present, the signal was present. I believe what happens that engine is slower, the RPM is slower, and takes the engine, the computer, longer time to process the data to start the engine over. And that's all I can do. I mean, you know, something else would be very interesting to actually see during that long crank. Does it activates the does it turn on the injectors and coils? All right. I cannot duplicate the problem all the way, but we can see now that it's just getting longer and longer. 1.4 seconds. So just as the battery voltage drops down in a cold morning, the RPM, the cranking RPM is lower and takes longer time for computer to read the sensor, and this whole time we have a sensor signal, but you know there is no injectors are not firing until here. Okay, got the battery in, cables are good. Let's start it up. All right. Okay, well, we'll see what happens. I'm confident that the battery is the problem, even though it took a while for that voltage to drop down. You know, this battery just didn't like the cold weather. It happens only once after before I get the cable fixed up, the ground cable. You know, it would happen a couple times a week, and after I fixed the cable, he took the car, and then like 2 or 3 days later, it was a very cold morning, and when he cranked it, that same code happened, and it didn't happen later for another 5 days at all. But you know, other than battery, I can't see anything else to be a problem, because both of these codes are flagging at the same time every time during cranking. So the cables are good now, everything is fine. The battery is 4 years old anyway, Walmart brand. It doesn't really matter what brand it is, but it's the you know, it happens every single time when the voltage drop below, you know, 10 volts, 11 volts, whatever. It's intermittent. Sometimes computer likes it, sometimes it doesn't. So, but every time we could see that the injector pulse was delayed, and it just because of the lower RPM during cranking, the computer needs longer time to process the data to start firing injectors and coils. And that's kind of actually a good test as well. If you have like, if the fuel pressure is suspect, and on this car it's very difficult, it doesn't have a Schrader valve, and you're trying to figure out why you have a long crank time, you know, getting your injector pulse real quick on the scope and crank the engine over, see if you have you know, do you have injector pulse but the engine is still cranking, then you will of course go to a something else like a fuel pressure. But if you don't have injector pulse, and during the cranking time until the engine starts, you know, until the engine doesn't start, of course, until the if you have a, I'm sorry, like if you have a delay on the injector pulse, then you go toward, you know, battery voltage drops, computer problem, input problem, and something like that. So, and I was able to verify on this car that I do have a good crankshaft position sensor during the long crank time. So now, before I finish, the car is already gone. There's one thing that I was not able to verify, and that is a possible parasitic battery drain. There's something stayed on and drained the battery out to the point where, you know, we had a, you know, low voltage and a long crank time. The fact that happened only once at a very cold, you know, a very cold morning, I don't think that's the case, because another 5 days later on everything was fine. And so I don't think that's the case. So that's still something that unfortunately I was not able to verify. It would be nice to keep the car overnight, get the AM clamp on and check that, but it is what it is. I mean, this is all I could do today. So, alright guys, I just want to verify that there's one more possibility, but very unlikely. Alright, thank you and see you next time.